Right.
Roger Whittaker's coming back. That's the Haunted.
Very kind of you to serenade us, Gary. Stop. Right. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Executive. My name is Councillor Clive Jones. I'm the leader of the council and will be chairing this meeting. Please ensure that any mobile devices or mobile phones are switched off. If you are participating via Teams when you are not speaking or being asked to speak, please mute your microphones. Please also note that the meeting is currently being webcast live. I would like to introduce the members of the executive and the officers who are supporting tonight's meeting. The officers: Susan Parsonage, Chief Executive; Andrew Moulton, the Council's Monitoring Officer; Priya Patel, Head of Democratic Services; and Graham Ebers, Deputy Chief Executive. The executive members are Councillor David Hare, Councillor Prue Bray, Councillor Sarah Coe, Councillor Rachel Bishop-Firth, Councillor Imogen Shepherd-Dubay, Deputy Leader Councillor Stephen Conway, Councillor Lindsay Ferris, Councillor Paul Fishwick, and Councillor Ian Fenwick. Ian Shenton, sorry. That was a blast of 40 years ago. And I do apologise, Lucy Ann. I didn't mention it, sorry. Right, so are there any apologies for absence? None? Thank you very much. And we've got the minutes, just like one change to the minutes of the previous meeting, 24th of November, on page 7, item 63, which is a statement from the leader, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph, fourth line, the word less needs to be inserted after 7,500, so that sentence reads, this is a disastrous budget from Truss, Kwarteng and Redwood, meaning many households in Wokingham will now have 7,500 less to spend in the local economy. So the word less is actually very important. Are there any declarations of interest? Ruth?
Thank you, Clive. I need to declare an interest in item 74.8, which is the Remenham footpath closure. The Open Spaces Society have objected, and I'm a member of the Open Spaces Society, so I will leave the room for that item.
Okay, so we'll change the agenda slightly so we take that as the last item and then you can leave. We now need to agree the minutes. All those in favour? As amended, yes. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you very much. I shall now make a short statement before the formal meeting begins this evening, I want to mention that we are beginning a piece of work to plan for what we want the future to look like in the borough. Wokingham Borough Council is embarking on a new approach to thinking about the future, one that is centred on the community's own aspirations. In the past, the council has drawn up its own strategy and then consulted on it. Now we want to involve our external partners in shaping a vision for the future that the council will then seek to implement through its strategy and policies. For the first time, the council is embracing a bottom-up rather than top-down approach. I've asked the council's deputy leader, Councillor Stephen Conway, to lead on this very important project, and we are very happy that he is able to do this along with all of his other responsibilities. We are looking for the involvement of the council's external partners throughout the process. This will truly be a borough vision, jointly authored by a range of interested parties, not just the council. To begin the process next week, there is a meeting in Wokingham Town Hall with representatives from town and parish councils, voluntary bodies, equality groups, businesses, faith groups, schools, young people, and the Reading University to discuss this new approach. The meeting will be facilitated not by the council, but by an organisation called New Local, which specialises in community engagement. The council will be represented by the leaders of the different political groups and the chief executive and senior officers, but the council will be there as an equal partner with the other bodies, not as the managers of the event. The opening session next week will be followed by a series of workshops in February and March to enable us to share views and begin the task of preparing a borough vision that will shape the council's strategy over the coming years. We have to lift our eyes from the immediate challenges and look ahead to map out the future that we can all feel part of. I'm very pleased that so many local bodies have committed to attending the event next week and the follow-up workshop. It is very important work for the future of the borough, and I urge the council partners to fully engage with this work. I'm now looking at the TV screen, and I see that we have a SM on there, which I think is Steve Moore. I think I'd like you to put your camera on, Steve, so we can see you. Steve is our director of place, and he's leaving us tomorrow after, I think, about 18 months to take up another appointment. And as leader of the council, I'd like to thank you for the very excellent work that you have done for us since you came here. You've been bloody difficult to work with, and you've been challenging, but that's what makes you such a good officer, because you don't just sit there and say, yes, okay, I'll do that. You give us alternatives, you point out pitfalls, and you are prepared to challenge the leadership, challenge in a very nice way without losing any temper, without being upset. And for me, I think that is particularly important, because people who are in very senior roles in the council have to be able to engage with councillors. Councillors have to be able to engage with the senior officers in a respectful way. And I can speak for the whole executive that we have a huge amount of respect for you, and you're going to be a very, very hard act to follow. I know where you're going. I know you'll still be available for a call at 7:15 in the morning, 7:30 in the morning, or even later at night. But I shall miss the early morning calls that we've had. I will be telling the people on the council that they are lucky to be getting such a good officer as you. And I will be telling them that at times you can be difficult and you can be challenging. But as I say, for me, that is something to be enormously respected. And I think you've done an excellent job for us. So thank you very much. We'll now go on to, you can turn your screen off now, Steve. Public question time. And the first question is from Mel Horton for the Executive Member for Health, Wellbeing and Adult Services.
Thank you. David, I think I'm addressing the question to you. So how many adults with learning disabilities combined with mobility needs are on the waiting list or have requested accommodation that the council has been unable to fulfil for supported living accommodation in Wokingham as of the 1st of January 2023?
Thank you for your question, Mel. As you know, supported living in Wokingham can range from a number of options, which includes accessing the general stock with outreach support, extra care support with access to background support overnight, and shared support, living accommodation, access to 24-hour care and support. Adult social care in partnership with colleagues in housing and operational commissioning hold a shared housing list, specifically for those with individuals on the housing list who are registered to have special needs. And there are currently about 100 people, 100 individuals on this list. Of those 100 on this list, about 14, well, exactly 14, have a learning disability combined with mobility needs, which is the answer to your question. None of these individuals have been assessed as having an urgent need for accommodation. All are currently accommodated with their families or in settled accommodation with a requirement to move. For these people living with families who have accessed the Care Act needs, robust packages of support are in place to assist carers and individuals. I would like to say, and in some ways this isn't your question, but it is something that I'm very proud of. In the last 2 or 3 years, we have developed the housing stock within Wokingham. We now have 29 individuals have moved into adapted accommodation in the last 2 or 3 years, and this accommodation was purpose-built to support individuals with mobility needs, and certainly I've seen it, it's wonderful. And there have been some great outcomes from this, and we're now going into the second phase of this, and we'll continue to build appropriate housing for the people who need it.
Thank you. Would you like a supplementary?
Yes, of course I would.
Okay.
In the light of your learning disability strategy, which is now in its 4th year, and the priority to plan and design housing, neighbourhoods and transport to meet the needs of the learning disabled adults in the community, how much additional supported living accommodation for adults with learning disability and mobility needs will become available in the next 3 months? As my brother is waiting to move to Wokingham, currently, as well as being assured his case is being reviewed weekly, it has been politely suggested we look elsewhere.
And I mean, as you might expect, I can't say how much will be available in the next 3 months. It depends on quite a lot of things. But I would say that certainly, as with all the cases that are looked at, your brother's case has been, looked at, and it's been politely suggested, as you say, to look perhaps into Bracknell or Reading and things like that. You want your brother to be as close to you as possible, and I can understand that. But if we can't find someone they can, which is appropriate, and that's the important thing, obviously, for your brother, then it's appropriate. Mm-hmm. Then that's a positive and better than him being up in Birmingham. So all I can say is we will go on working to ensure that your brother finds somewhere down here with Birmingham and do all that we can. But there are other people as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
The next question is from Keith Malvern to ask a question of the Executive Member for Health, Wellbeing and Adult Services. Nice to see you, Keith.
Good evening. An outline planning application number 211777. How we will remember that. Valid on the 8th of June 2021. Not quite 2 years, for up to 130 residential units under a 70-bed care home was approved, subject to conditions, at the end of last year. How much money has the Borough Council spent on this proposal before the application was submitted and since then?
Thank you, Keith, for your question. Obviously, the planning consent referenced in this question for the 70-bedded home and the 130 residential units at Townley East in North Wokingham. The provision of new care homes, as you know, an important priority for the council as a replacement for Suffolk Lodge and for a specialist dementia care home. And we'll ensure we can offer high quality, local, affordable care for all our residents. Approximately £340,000 was spent on site surveys, feasibility and design work, and the planning application preparation to secure outline planning consent. Following the granting of this outline planning consent, about 500,000 has been spent on detailed design and preparation for a start on the site, for the construction of the site-wide infrastructure, and for the care home. This spend is within the capital budget for the project as allocated within the council's medium-term financial plan.
Do you have a supplementary question, Keith?
I do. I'm just getting over the slight shock about the sums involved, that's all. Well, as you all know, and all will know, this has been has significant local concerns expressed by local members, local residents association, and members of the public, all important things, particularly about the safety of the access from the A321. So of the amount of money that's been specified, how much has been spent to come to an acceptable solution, and how much money has been spent explaining to local residents and councillors what that is?
I'll be quite honest, Keith, I'm not sure, and if you want that, I'm sure I can get it from officers, but I would say that there has been, as you said, quite a loud concern about the access, and that has been worked on fairly intensely, and to make it as safe as possible and beyond just the ordinary, yes, this passes okay, to be better than that, because we want it to be a safe access for the residents, for the people who are there, for the people who go and visit people in the care home, for the staff and people like that. So we want to make it as safe as possible, obviously, and I can find out the sums for you if you like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I won't move to supplementary 2, 3, 4, and 5.
I could see you attempted.
Very interesting. Thanks, Ed.
Good job.
And the next question is from Juliet Sherratt to ask a question of the Executive Member for Children's Services. I don't think Juliet is here. I don't think she's online, so she will get a written answer. Okay, then we move to member questions, and the first question is from Gary Cowan, and it's a question for me.
Oh yeah, thank you, Clive. Does Woking Borough Council staff have access to welfare support services or an employee assistance provider or any other such services that are not available to elected councillors? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Gary. The welfare of staff and councillors is of the utmost importance to the council. And on this basis, I can confirm that the council does commission the services of a company called Vita Health Group to provide an employee assistance programme, which is available for both staff and councillors to access. Other support the council offers is mental health first aiders, These are staff members who can be approached if someone is experiencing poor mental health or emotional distress. They offer a non-judgmental space for someone to speak in confidence, and if required, they can guide the person to appropriate professional support. This is currently a group that is available to staff, but could be something that we explore further for councillors if it was felt that this would be helpful. Do you have a supplementary question, Gary?
Yeah, thank you, Clive. That's a very welcome answer. I asked a question on whistleblowing in the September Council and what guidance arrangements in the Constitution applied only to employees, former employees, agency staff and contractors engaged by the Council. The answer went on to say that it did not apply to elected members as they had no employment to protect. So I welcome your comment, and I would suggest, will the rewrite of the Constitution attempt to correct this treatment of elected councillors? I think you said that you would do something, but that would be very welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I'll bring this to the Constitutional Review Working Group. I think that what you've said is valid, that councillors also need to be supported and they should be treated the same as officers. So thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you, that's very welcome.
And the second question is from Councillor Giles Margetts to ask a question of the Executive Member for Planning and the Local Plan. Evening, Charles.
Thank you. So my question is for Lindsay. The best way to control development in the borough is to create a local plan. This administration put the local plan on hold when it took control of the council last year. In council late last year, you stated a timetable for a new plan would appear in 2023. Please could you advise when you expect this to appear and when you hope for it to be completed?
Thank you for your question. You are mistaken. The local plan is not on hold. It never has been. A substantial body of work is continuing on the evidence base that will support future discussions and sound decision making. This includes work on transport, flood risk modelling, housing, economic and retail assessments, all of which you will agree are essential. As you will be aware, the government is consulting on changes to the national planning policy. I cautiously welcome some of the government's proposals. However, it is important that we reflect on this before agreeing a revised programme for the local plan and publish the next stage. Whilst preparing the evidence base is taking a little longer than previously expected, we continue to work on this and the plan so that we are ready to push forward as soon as a national picture becomes clearer.
Do you have a supplementary, Charles? I'm
do.
sure you do.
Yes, thank you. My question was, I note your comments basically about what you said, and I note there's been no concrete offer of a firm timetable there, and I follow the logic of what you said as well. My question was really as a ward member in Finch Hampstead, which I represent, there have been a number of applications which have appeared recently, which historically the council has been able to defend, where advice from officers has been to go recommend approval, or we've lost appeals because we don't have a current local plan and we don't have 5-year land supply. And I think my concern is basically that this position, with things not moving forward, basically, I accept what you said about the background work entirely, but things not moving forward to the next stage of consultation is making this easier for sites to be developed, which the council's historically fought against. I'm just seeking your what would I say? The question is, what other protection can you give in the short run, or can the council give to help defend these marginal sites, which people feel very strongly should not be developed?
It's an interesting one here. I think I've got to make some comments back on individual areas because I believe you handed in a petition a year ago demanding that your own team should abandon elements of their draft local plan, such as building 270 houses on Rook's Nest. Are you now wishing that you hadn't done that and that you actually want the original local plan that was put together last year to have gone ahead? We have been only doing what the residents requested and looking at the objections made by people, including in Fanchampstead and many other places and across the borough, in a way that the previous administration hadn't done. What we are doing now is that what we promised to do, which is to listen to the objections and ask the officers to see if there are any better options. And we have done that. We have been looking at 4 large areas within the borough, which I was disappointed your colleagues did not wish to be involved with. This has been done properly, and it takes time. But the current housing numbers are a result. We lost the 5-year land supply. The date that I can confirm we lost it was February the 18th, 2022, which was 3 months before I took on this role. So the issue of the 5-year land supply is something that we as an administration has inherited. But I acknowledge that at the moment, and this is why I made mention of the government proposals, because if the government proposals as they currently stand come into force in April, then 2 important areas are raised. The first is that there is a mention of over-provision being taken account. And that means that if you've got an over-provision in your current local plan, and remember we already have a local plan, albeit getting on long in the tooth, if over-provision in the current local plan is able to be taken into account in the new local plan, then that becomes very advantageous for here in Wokingham, because at the moment we have the over-provision figure has been calculated at over 1,700 properties. In addition, the draft NPPF talks about removing the housing buffer, and the housing buffer in Wokingham is calculated at 5%. That works out at 40 dwellings a year, and for 15 years comes up to close to 500. When you add those together, we are over 2,200 towards 2,300 dwellings that we as a local authority would not need to plan. The current proposal works on 780 dwellings a year. If we are able to get what I've just mentioned, we will have around about a figure of closer to 600, if not below. And I think it is worth fighting to have a local plan which is 2,200 plus lower than the original plan that was put together 12 months ago, and than to carry on with the current local plan. And even if we had got to Reg 19, we would still be in the same position as we are, because without a 5-year land supply, the council and the area is at risk with planning. And we can win some. It doesn't mean we will lose all planning applications, but we will lose some. But that is the fact. So even if we had gone right the way through to Reg 19 on the current local plan, we would still be in the same position you have mentioned. And I think it is 10 times better for us to move on a local plan, which is a much lower figure because of those proposals. And what I would like you to do, and your colleagues, is to ensure and lobby your MPs to make sure that those 2 parts that were in the draft NPPF remain there when it comes to fruition in April, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you. I know I'm not allowed another question. I would just say I've been lobbying my MP for about 5-6 years on these issues. So basically, you will not find any fight from me on that point.
Has he listened? Hopefully. Thank you very much, Charles. The next question is from Councillor Norman Jorgensen to ask a question of the Executive Member for Active Travel Transport on Highways.
Right, thank you. Good evening. Footbridge over the railway and A329M beside Early Station is an important link between Early and Woodley. What are the plans to ensure this remains available?
Thank you, Norman, for your question. The footbridge is on a quarterly monitoring programme. The last monitoring inspection was undertaken during December 2022, and there were no safety concerns raised at that time that would require consideration for closing the footbridge. Council is currently investigating improvements to this bridge and are engaged with our consultant and specialist contractor to carry out investigations for either a refurbishment or replacement of the structure should that be required.
I assume you have a supplementary, Norman.
Yeah, please. I mean, over the last couple of years, we've been speaking about this, and we were told that it was not possible to repair the bridge. So I just wonder what's changed that's on the agenda again. And secondly, what the timescales are for this, please.
As I said, we are currently engaged with our consultant and specialist contractor. I think we need to await the findings from that report, and that will then determine the next steps of going forward. But once we receive that report, I'll update ward members and both town councils.
Thank you, Norman.
Thank you.
And the next question is from Councillor Alison Swaddle to ask a question of the Executive Member for Active Travel Transport on Highways.
Good evening. Hello, Paul. Without a copy of the agenda, I'll read my question to you. How does the council propose to continue the current level of road maintenance that our residents expect if there is not to be increased provision in the budget?
Thank you, Alison, for your question. Wokingham Borough Council has a duty to maintain all adopted highway assets within Wokingham. To ensure the duty is fulfilled, WBC carries out periodic safety inspections of various highway assets to ensure they are safe for public use. Any found to be safety critical will be addressed by carrying out repair work. The condition and service inspections are carried out in accordance with the annual inspection programs, and the latest data is fed into various asset management systems to maintain an up-to-date central record of the asset condition and carry out required capital works within available budgets to extend assets longevity.
Have a supplementary?
I do.
I'm sure
Thank
you do.
you. When the Conservatives were in control of the borough, we doubled the highways maintenance budget, not just to improve the maintenance, but also make a start on minor and residential roads. As you know, residents are concerned about the state of their roads, and they're always calling on us to make improvements. For this budget year, 22-23, we'd set aside 11 million for road repairs and a special pothole fund. Unfortunately, we couldn't ensure this was spent wisely as the coalition took control in May. In the coming budget year, it looks as though you're going to cut funding for pothole maintenance in real terms. With inflation at 10%, surely this is going to have to mean cuts. And following the harsh cold winter that we are experiencing, roads are going to need much more maintenance, not less. Within my ward, residents of Ravensbourne Drive are particularly concerned as only part of their road was resurfaced and they're not satisfied with the quality of that. So what hope can you offer our residents that we will be able to offer them proper maintenance of their roads going forward?
Each year, there's something called Alarm. It's the annual local authority road maintenance surveys are undertaken. They are published usually around March each year, and the latest one was undertaken in March 2022. Covers England and Wales, and it's all local highways, so local roads. In that last survey, Alarm raised the point that there's over £12.6 billion worth of a backlog of highway maintenance across England and Wales's local roads. That funding needs to come from government. Government have underinvested in local highway roads for a long, long time. And without that funding, our assets will continue to deteriorate. In the meantime, we are left with a revenue budget to undertake pothole repairs. As I said in full council last week, we have approximately 5,300 roadworks undertaken within just Wokingham Borough on an annual basis. And 75% of those are undertaken by the utility companies. The utility company who saw cuts into our road, into the carriageway, immediately makes a weak area because of the reinstatement, although maybe to standards, there is a weakness there already. We have just gone through one of the coldest Decembers since 2010. Our second half of December was also very wet. And we've also had the second wettest start from the 1st to this 15th of January in 102 years. Both of those combined makes it the second wettest and one of the coldest on record. That does not help with any weaknesses in our carriageway. We need investment now from government and very quickly.
Thank you, Alison.
I don't have any comeback, do I? No.
No. I'm sure if you want to email Paul, he will respond to you if you have any more questions. Okay, we move to item number 74.1, playing pitch strategy. And can I ask the executive member for the Environment, Sport and Leisure, Ian Shenton, to introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Clive. At the executive meeting in July 2022, approval was given to progress with the proposal to build a 3G football pitch at Maiden Early School. And that was subject to full public consultation. While that consultation confirmed the demand for 3G capacity in the area, it also identified some difficulties with the site. Meanwhile, the council's worsening financial situation had become apparent, and the estimated project cost had also escalated, so that 3G provision in the early and lower early area needed to be reassessed. We believe that this is best achieved as part of a revised borough-wide playing pitch strategy, with the cessation of work on the Maiden Early proposal at this time, and we are seeking approval accordingly.
Thank you, Ian. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Ian? No? I think we'll move to the vote then. And on, this is agenda item 74.1, page 17, and we have the recommendation on that page. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Agenda item 74.2, and can I ask Executive Member for Climate Emergency and Resident Services, Sarah Kerr, to introduce this item.
Thanks, Clive. So this is the energy contract procurement. So this was going to be on the October meeting, but obviously there was the government announcement of a financial aid package. So we put this on hold while we established what that actually meant and what was going on.
Can you turn it in?
My microphone's on. Okay. We now know that the aid package only applies for this financial year. So we are proceeding with this, but we obviously are continuing to look at any further announcements from the government. So there are two drivers for this, cost avoidance and being able to purchase greener energy. So we moving away from the CCS framework to laser. This allows us to purchase, obviously we're putting renewable energy onto our assets, but we still need to purchase energy because we can't generate everything we need. And it increases the amount of green energy we're procuring. And what's important is the laser framework offers something called REGO, which is the Renewable Energy Guarantees of Origin contracts, which demonstrate those proven sources of green energy sources. There's a lot of greenwashing in this industry, so those REGO contracts are quite important. So that's something that Laser is able to offer us. There's cost avoidance with this. So what they're able to do is offer some flexibility with how we purchase. They do things like time of use tariffs and variable pricing. And they do purchase some of their energy in advance, but they also are able to purchase in response to the changing markets, which helps them keep its costs down. So they're more agile. More and more local authorities are moving over to laser now, and it's tried and tested. So I'm hoping, basically it's going to make us greener and save us money in the long run. So I'm hoping I've got your support on this.
Sure, yeah.
Good package.
Yes. Anybody want to make any comments?
Yeah.
Imogen?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody knows that our energy costs have been rising heavily over the last few months, and we need our energy prices to be predictable and at a manageable level. So what I saw was being part of this laser scheme allows us to take advantage of the economies of scale that come with buying energy in bulk, and the laser contract is more flexible in terms of when and where we buy its energy. So with our it predicts that we are going to avoid costs, and from the Revenue General Fund specifically. So I see that this contract sensibly ensures that more of the energy we use will come from renewable sources. And I kind of want to congratulate our contracts and energy team for working through this contract for the council. So I think that would be my final note, really.
I just want to add to that. I mean, since taking over this portfolio in May, I've been really, really impressed with our energy team and the expertise that we have there. They've been absolutely brilliant. So,
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for acknowledging the work that our energy team is doing. I think it's very nice that can be publicly acknowledged like you just have. So, thank you. Any other questions, comments for Sarah? No. So item 74.2, page 21, energy contract procurement. All those in favour of the recommendation on that page? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We move to item 73.4, revenue monitoring. 22-23, quarter three.
Yep, I guess this one's mine, isn't it? Yes, you said 73.4, it's through.
Did I?
74.3, yes.
I shouldn't turn the page over like that. 74.3.
74.3. Well, obviously, this report is showing the forecast of the revenue finances up to this third quarter of this year, and it includes the general fund, the housing revenue account, and the DSG, the dedicated school grants. The red numbers, as you see, are underspend, and the black numbers are overspend. And as you can see, we have a significant overspend in children's services, which reflect the problems we've found in that area this year. And I will ask Prue in a minute to speak on this. So, but while savings have been made in other areas, it does not cover the problem we have with children's services. But I do know there are plans in place to get this under control, and getting children to school, supporting those children in care and providing children with special needs. It's a statutory function of this council, and it's basically not an expense that we can avoid spending. So in place of growth, there's been a loss of income from car parking, and I know the team have reduced some of their maintenance work to improved our waste tonnage and made other savings to cover this gap, but it still leaves a predicted overspend of 115,000 at the moment. but there is still time to reduce this gap in the last quarter of this year. Resources and assets, there's still a predicted shortfall of 154,000. This is mainly because our leisure services have still not properly recovered from COVID, but they may pick up in this quarter. And the general fund balance is currently predicted to be 7.731 million at the end of the year, but there is still time to improve that position. So given the economic pressures that this council has been under as a result of the inflation, legacy of COVID and Brexit, there has clearly been an awful lot of work to manage our costs this year, and that really also should be acknowledged. I do have the HRA exceeding their budget this year, but the reserves are able to cope with the shortfall. We still should have a sensible remaining reserve. And as I said, there's still time to claw back some of the predicted overspends before the end of the year and make further savings. And I know our officers are working hard to do this. We have reduced our predicted end of year overspend by 250,000 from Q2 and 957,000 from the Q1 report. So I think that's quite an achievement that we should acknowledge. Okay, I think I'm going to ask Prue to speak.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Sorry.
That's okay, Imogen?
Yeah, are you happy? So
Yeah.
Thank you. So obviously, Children's Services has got a 1.2 million overspend. Children's Services is in a difficult position because they don't have any choice. It's a demand-led service, so you cannot refuse to carry children to school if you're obliged to do so. If they live too far away from the school they're in, you can't refuse to. Well, nobody in their right minds would refuse to do something about a child that needs social care interventions in their lives. We have particular pressures in Woking. Being a small authority, we've had a 30% increase in the number of children in care, and most of that pressure has come from unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, where the government had made in December last year, the year before last now, made it mandatory to take children, whereas before it was not quite a voluntary scheme, but more or less voluntary. And they have, in the middle of last year, then upped the requirement, the number that you were allocated. So this has led to a big increase in our costs. Those children come in, we have, they've had a terrible experience coming to this country. We need to look after them, but they then become children in care in Wokingham and then move on to be care leavers. So that does have significant budgetary implications for us, particularly because the funding changes when they hit 18. So they're reasonably funded up to that age and then hardly funded at all after that. And I think it's about a tenth of the funding, something like that. So it doesn't cover our costs. The home to school transport is a perennial problem that has existed for many years. Similar levels of overspend. It has never been adequately budgeted for. People have always been over optimistic about what could be achieved. It is coming to Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny next week as an agenda item to be looked at, what all the pressures are and what work is being done. And I know that we are engaged with the consultant to look at what else we can do. Changes were made in 2021, which came into effect in September 2022. And Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny will be looking at the impact of those changes next week. But there's not a lot we can do about children that need our intervention, and therefore we have to do this.
Thank you, Prue. Stephen?
Thank you, Clive. I won't add anything to what Imogen's already said about the housing revenue account. At next month's executive, we will be discussing the proposed rent rise, so that will be a time to put more focus on the HRA. But I would like to make some general comments, if I may, that amplify what Imogen has said. The council has faced really unprecedented financial challenges this year. When the budget was set in February of last year by the previous administration, the then leader of council talked about needing to use reserves because they were for a rainy day and it was raining. Well, now we're facing a torrential storm, never mind heavy rain, double-digit inflation, increasing demand for services, not just in children's services, but across the piece, and significant shortfalls in anticipated income and a rise in interest rates, which of course makes the cost of our borrowing so much greater. So in that context, I think it's really important to say there's been some phenomenal work done by our excellent officer teams across the council to contain these financial pressures and to squeeze down and down wherever we can. And there is inevitably one directorate has faced the biggest challenge, and that's place and growth, because it's the area with the biggest portion of non-statutory spending. So it's borne the brunt, and we praised Steve for his role earlier, Steve Moore earlier, for his role on the council. But this last few months, this must have been the hardest of that period for him. And I want to just add to Imogen's very positive comments about the role of the officers in helping us to try and drive down the in-year deficit and prepare ourselves for next year. They have done an absolutely splendid job, and chiefly the man sitting behind me here, Graham Ebers, the Chief Finance Officer. It's very impressive, and we are confident that we will continue to drive down this figure and get ourselves to an in-year balance. So thank you very much, Imogen, for all your work too, and Graham and the finance team, and all of the council departments for working so hard to contain the budgetary pressures.
Thank you, Stephen. I think I would like to add my thanks as well, because I think all of the senior officers, assistant directors have really worked extremely hard to get us into the financial position that we think that we're in now. It really was a surprise when we took over the council that maybe things were not as great as we had been led to believe. But it was something that we all started to address, the executive, the senior officers, as soon as we took over the administration. So I am very, very grateful to people like you, Graham, for what you have been doing for us. So thank you very much. Does anybody else want to add anything? No? Right. So item 74.3, page 39, the recommendation, middle of the page. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Item 74.4, capital monitoring 22-23, quarter 3, and I'd like Imogen to introduce us.
This is a good news story, and we've been able to reduce the spend on our capital projects and now have a predicted underspend for this year of 35.9 million. The changes are listed in Appendix A, which if you've got that. You can also see in Appendix B, many projects have been moved to future years due to planning, design and construction challenges, and a number of projects are being reassessed due to the current national economic conditions, and I expect these future predictions to change. And obviously we know construction costs is not in a good place at the moment, so we can expect changes. We will expect to spend more time looking at our capital projects over the next year to see what work is really necessary and if they could be reprofiled without a significant impact to the council. We are having to allocate an extra 388,333 of capital funds to schools this year to help them improve their energy efficiency. And I also congratulate our officers in making the decisions needed to help us reduce this capital spend. And on that note, I'm finishing.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions, any comments? No? Okay, so Ruth?
To say something about the recommendation 3. So this is a small good news story for schools in that they've got some additional money and it's provided by the government and not by us. It's not,
is.
yes, it's not a huge amount, but it's something to help them. We've got a lot of capital cost pressure coming in the next year where we have to provide additional school places, and we're committed to the Bolton sixth form. So there will be pressure on the capital programme. But this year, I think everybody's done a good job and sorted it out. So we're very grateful for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? No? So it's agenda item 74.4, page 53 of the agenda, and the recommendation is there, top of the page. All those in favour? Thank you, that is unanimous. Item 74.5 is a report on the corporate peer challenge and the follow-up visit from the local government officers. So as I'm sure we all know, the Local Government Association have been undertaking a peer review of our council. They visited us in November 2021 under the previous administration and returned in October 2022 under our new Lib Dem administration. As with usual practice, the assessing team comprises a chair from the same political party as the ruling group of the council being looked at. So in November 2021, the Conservative leader of Essex County Council, Councillor Kevin Bentley, was the chair. The team also comprised of 2 senior officers of unrelated councils, and finally an experienced person from the Local Government Association. The only change in the review team, who we saw in 2022, was the Conservative leader of Essex County Council stood aside for the Lib Dem group leader of Liverpool City Council, Councillor Richard Kemp. Both are very experienced councillors who have done a lot of work for the LGA and continue to do so. Their independence and impartiality is therefore not an issue. Equally, I'm sure that when one of Wokingham's own councillors takes part in a peer review, they also show complete independence and impartiality. And I am, of course, referring to long-standing Conservative councillor, Councillor Pauline Hellier-Simons, who undertakes peer review challenges of Conservative-run councils. Sadly, there have been some misleading Facebook posts from someone who clearly doesn't understand how peer reviews work, suggesting that peer reviews show political bias. All members of the peer review panel who work for the LGA are independent. If they weren't, I'm sure that they wouldn't be getting further roles from the LGA. Say again, both Councillor Bentley and Councillor Kemp have been undertaking work for many years for the LGA. The feedback following the second visit from the independent reviewers was very good, and several improvements were found. The peer review feedback states the peer team observed that there has been a palpable and positive change at Wokingham in tone, style and purpose, and felt that they were encountering a council that was in a very different, which was very different to a year ago, which is a credit to the work of both officers and members. They also said that the council has clearly embraced the issues they are facing at the time of the original peer challenge and turned them into opportunities using the financial position and the change in political control as an impetus for change. My executive and I and indeed the senior leadership team believe that it's important to learn from others, and I'm pleased the peer review team has seen improvements in the council. They noted in particular that this Lib Dem administration does not shy away from difficult decisions, and given the difficult national economic position, that is very important. I would urge anybody interested in knowing how we work to have a look at the report, which is on the council's website. The peer team found there was very clear evidence that Wokingham was focused on building its capacity, in particularly bolstering their change function, which included the appointment of a new Assistant Director of Finance, as well as a new Assistant Director for HR and Organisational Development. This approach has made the corporate leadership team more joined up as a result, with joint ownership across senior officers in owning the key challenges facing the council. It's encouraging that these independent assessors have found we are going in the right direction and have improved against their recommendations. But we are not complacent, and we will continue to work with our partners for the good of all of our residents. At last week's full council, I took the opportunity to publicly thank our staff who have worked so hard for us to be able to get this very complimentary report from the local government association by asking our chief executive to convey my thanks and the thanks of the executive and the Lib Dem group to all of the staff who have worked so hard for us. I very much hope that the other party leaders would also want to associate themselves with my remarks. Do I have any questions or any comments from anyone? No? So, agenda item 74.5, page 65, the recommendation that the executive notes the progress report from the Corporate Peer Challenge. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Agenda item 74.6, revised local bus services improvement plan, to be presented by Paul Fishwick.
Thank you, Clive. This is not new, as the Borough Council's first bus service improvement plan was published on the 29th of October 2021. All local transport authorities are required to review their BSIPs on an annual basis. Wokingham Borough Council was unsuccessful in achieving any BSIP grant funding on its first submission. However, Reading Borough Council were successful, and part of their funding will benefit services originating in Wokingham Borough, as set out on page 117 of the draft bus service improvement plan. We have received feedback from the Department for Transport related to their first BSIP and met with their representatives to try and understand more about what could improve this revised document. The key changes to the draft BSIP are updated background information, strengthening the role of partnership working, revised targets and policies. The draft BSIP has been presented to the Community and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 29th of November 2022, and the final draft version is presented this evening. Local bus services are vital for Wokingham Borough and the wider area. They play an important role for people to access jobs, retail and services, schools, further education, business-to-business connectivity, visiting the hospital, health centres, as well as leisure activities. They are a lifeline for the community and the economy and carry 2.8 million passengers per annum. In the Wokingham Borough area, passenger number growth was the second highest in England outside of London in the 10 years until 2019-2020, at 40%. The pandemic hit our local buses severely, but they have recovered to around 81% of the pre-pandemic levels. Turning to climate change, the local bus service fleet is one of the youngest and most environmentally friendly in the UK, with 73% at Euro 6 standard and 20% biomass, the remaining 7% at Euro 5 standard. Therefore, a positive step towards tackling the climate emergency. The importance of local buses is that a typical bus takes the space of about 2.5 cars. So buses can be expected to move about 5 to 10 times more people along a given corridor compared to cars. However, there are significant pressures on the local bus industry. The main pressures relate to fuel prices, driver shortages and wage increases, maintenance and general operations. Furthermore, bus travel post-pandemic is still 19% lower than before, which means reduced income. I wrote to the Secretary of State for Transport highlighting the driver shortage issue in November, and Clive Jones, the leader of the council, and myself recently wrote to the Secretary of State highlighting the major issue of no clear future of funding support, as the challenge to fund and maintain a financially sustainable network without central government assistance now rests with the council, local bus operators and our partners. In addition, Clive Jones, the leader, and I had the opportunity to ask the Minister for Roads and Local Transport, Richard Holden MP, last week about the driver shortage and lack of future funding. We recognise the vital role of local bus services for our residents in offering greener and healthier travel alternatives. However, if we want to continue to have a good bus network, we also need people to use the buses. I therefore urge residents to take the bus wherever possible, and with the £2 single fare incentive, except for football and school allocated buses, now is a great time to start. There is still no certainty over the level of funding the council might expect to receive from the DfT to support the delivery of BSIP outcomes. However, our objectives are set out on page 85 of the report. I would also like to thank Officer Rebecca Brooks for all her hard work that she has carried out in producing this document. Finally, I would recommend approval of the revised local bus service improvement plan for publication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Anybody have any comments they would like to make?
Just to second the thanks to Rebecca for a splendid piece of work, Paul.
I think when Paul and I joined other council leaders from unitary authorities and had a conversation with Richard Holden, Paul was very direct, very to the point, asking if there was going to be more support for buses following the support that we got during the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, there wasn't a commitment from the minister, and I don't particularly hold out much hope that there will be enough money to keep bus services running all over the country. I think the minister may well want to give a lot more money to bus services, but I think that the Treasury have got handcuffs on him. So, yes, when I finished.
I thought you noticed the Prue's work.
Well, I have finished now. Thank you.
Good.
Prue.
I wasn't planning to say anything, but I think there is one person who hasn't been thanked, and that's Paul, who has put an enormous amount of effort into
Absolutely.
this. Has been a great advocate for bus services and has been working very well with our bus suppliers isn't the right word, but with the bus services that operate, the bus operators that work locally, and I'd like to thank him for that.
Yeah, thank you, Prue. Thank you, Paul. All right. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Item 74.6, page, oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm just, item 74.6, page 83 of the agenda. The recommendation there, that it is there. All those in favour? Thank you very much. That is unanimous. Agenda item 74.7, NEC Systems, a contract renewal. Can I ask Sarah to take us through this?
I've got another positive one, sir, another cost avoidance one. So I've got the lucky reports. I'd like to thank the officers involved in this. So NEC, we use across the council for many different IT systems, council tax, housing, use it corporately. We actually have about 20 different contracts with them. And officers went to NEC and set them the challenge of driving down cost. And the response is to bring, amalgamate the various contracts together into one 5-year contract, and the cost avoidance is through the avoidance of inflationary costs. I mean, obviously, it depends on what inflation is. You'll see in the report that there are different inflationary amounts and the possibility of what could be saved based on that. But we know that we have inflation, so it's great to have those projected potential savings there. This route forward is supported by the service areas that use these IT systems. They're very happy with them. I should note that there's only a small number of players in the field for these systems, only 2 or 3. But we, as I said, the service areas are very happy with the service that's provided by them. And what we're proposing is procurement compliant and supported by our procurement colleagues, and it's been approved by the Strategic Contracts Board. So there's not really much more to say other than this is obviously helping us, say, avoid cost, which is particularly important in the financial circumstances we face. And I'd like to again thank the officers who've done a phenomenal amount of work. I mean, this is just one of the areas that they've been driving down cost in this directorate. So thank you, Sally, Glyn and the team.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Any questions or comments, Imogen?
Sure. I mean, I'd just like to say, in reading this, I mean, these systems obviously provide services that are industry standard and essential businesses to this council. So, and moving to another provider would certainly incur significant costs. Looking at it, contract of 12% increase over 5 years, providing a fixed price that will buffer this council from fluctuations in inflation and keeping the cost predictable is actually what I would consider to be a sensible move at this point in time. So I'm going to support this quite happily.
Any other questions or comments? No? Okay. So agenda item 74.7, page 167 of the agenda, and the recommendation is there. All in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. I'm now going to move to 74.9. and we will take 74.8 as the last item on the agenda. So 74.9 is the Chief Financial Officer's report. And Imogen, can you present this to us?
Sure, it's me again. Okay. This is basically a statutory report that is produced by our Chief Financial Officer, Graham Evers, who's sitting over there, and is produced on an annual basis, and it reports his view on the state of the council's finances. The final version will be revealed at the budget meeting in February, but this one is here to help us with the budget setting process. So obviously it has to be an independent opinion that is free from political influence, and it presents his view on the robustness of the budget, including the level of reserves, as well as highlighting any major problems that this council is facing. It is fair to say that this borough is facing some of the most acute financial challenges in many years. The COVID pandemic, cost of living, inflation rises, migration and the impacts of Brexit. Inflation on our budget this year alone was 11 million. So this report highlights the shortfall we have received from the local government finance settlement, and the fact that it is only for 1 year. If it's only for 1 year, it does not give us the certainty for a budget for the following years. So we don't know what we're going to get the following subsequent years. I understand the government has been talking about giving us a 3-year settlement, but it's just never materialised. So, and yet again, in terms of population, we have received the least amount of money from the government. We have written a letter in Appendix 6 as our response to the Department of Housing, Communities and Local Government, which highlights the problems this is causing us. And both Clive and I have signed it, so, and Graham. If Wokingham was just to receive the average payment that other councils get, it would inject a whopping £30 million into our budget. It's really that far adrift, is what we're saying. So even if Wokingham has less deprivation in some areas, we do not have the ability to raise our council tax to an adequate level to pay for our services that our residents need. Council tax is capped every year and doesn't even match inflation. So even though if we have less deprivation, we are struggling to raise our income to meet the services that we need with this current level. So Graham also illustrates how our government funding overall has been cut over the years. The funding has been reduced by a proportionate amount of level of 53 million since 2011. So our budget has been going down year and year and year, our government payments. The question of reserves is also reserved here. Our general fund balance was historically expected to have a minimum target in the region of 9 million, but last year's administration chose to use part of the reserve to balance the budget rather than taking the necessary steps needed to balance the budget properly. Using the reserves is an unsustainable method of balancing the books as it increases the level of risk to this council, or basically while it slowly loses financial stability and heads towards what most people call bankruptcy. Any use of these reserves must come with a plan to turn around the financial losses. So if anyone's dipping into reserves for anything, there needs to be a proper plan in place to reverse it. For us this year, there is a predicted 1.3 million shortfall in this year's budget, but we aim to work to reduce it throughout this final quarter. So hopefully it will be less than that when we've done. So this coming year, we will not be using general fund reserve, and we will take necessary steps to stabilise decline. You can see this report, we intend to restore the reserves to a historic level of 9 million, providing stability and security to this council. One of the highlights of the report is on page 214. It shows that this year the council is predicted to make a staggering saving and additional income efficiencies of 11.8 million, which is twice as much as last year and nearly twice as much as the previous year. This is a result of working closely with our officers with the threat of inflationary increases we have been facing. It shows what good financial management really looks like, and that this is a remarkable achievement to have found this much money in this year. It is important to note that when this year's budget was set, one that we're currently in, no one could have predicted the war in Ukraine or the international financial consequences that this has had. So we must be mindful that whatever we set, that the effect has had and the effect this has had, none of us have a crystal ball. We are estimating, we're taking a guess at what we're going to do next year, but we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know, just like Ukraine, we don't know what's going to happen. Overall inflation and the increase in interest rates are putting pressure on the council as a whole, just the same as our residents. Moving on, the report shows that 60% of our revenue spend is on adult and children's services, leaving only 40% for everything else, such as bins, potholes, libraries and grass cutting. Some of the risks mentioned include adult social care, although the proposed care cap reforms have been postponed for 3 years. There has been woefully inadequate funding proposed and provided to prepare for this change. There is also currently greater pressure on local councils to accept patients being discharged from hospitals with inadequate funding to support them. And when the care industry is struggling to source staff, this is creating a significant problem for everybody. Children's services, as we've talked about, have huge problems supporting large numbers of children with special educational needs, and home to school transport costs have escalated out of control. We have had a large number of in-year admissions to the area, and we're supporting asylum-seeking families. The dedicated school grant is the funding provided to schools from central government, and as you can see, the high needs block that supports SEND children has been underfunded for a number of years, and this has been running a deficit since 2017-2018. This year, there is a plan being put together to try and rectify that problem. The capital programme, which is also mentioned here, is funded from a mixture of grants, developer contributions, capital receipts and borrowed money. It is this borrowing that we need to watch more closely, and while Graham thinks that a level of borrowing is affordable, we will need to do more to balance this budget for future years past next year. Finally, the report shows that we are still one of the most robust financially robust councils in the country when it comes to financial stability. And CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, has still put us in the top 20 of councils in the country. Graham's final statements will be released with the budget in February. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Imogen. Anybody have any questions or comments? The only thing that I would add is a previous council leader said to me when I said that we've been the lowest funded unitary authority for 8 or 9 years, he said, you have got that wrong. It's been the last 14 years because he was the leader when it first happened. And I just think that really there has to be a change of attitude from the government, because we can't always be at the bottom of the pile and not get the same amount of support from government that so many other councils get. Any other questions or comments, Prue?
Again, Children's Services, it's in the report that the schools are the third worst funded. So they're just as badly off as us, really.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for them to make their budgets balance.
It's not good. We really need to be able to get more out of the government. We should be able to do it with a former Prime Minister in our borough, but it doesn't happen. So Stephen, sorry.
Very quick comment, if I may. We may be judged by the government to be an affluent borough and therefore not in need of the kind of level of support, for instance, that neighbouring Reading receives. But to be not well off in a borough like this is tough. And we still have many people, an increasing number of people in this cost of living crisis who are facing real hardship. And one of the things we are trying to do through this budget setting process is clearly balance our books, but also find the resource. And it's not easy, but find the resource to be able to target help on those most in need. And that's something I think we can all be very proud of.
Yep. Any other questions or comments? No? So agenda item 74.9, page 193 of the agenda recommendation. As you have it there, all those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. So we come to the last item on the agenda, 74.8, and you're leaving. Thank you, Prue. Bye. This is the temporary closure of Remenham footpath number 4 for the Henley Festival. And can I ask Councillor Ian Shenton to present it to us?
Thank you, Clive. Each year, the Henley Festival requires some temporary closures of Remenham footpath number 4, which is the Thames footpath, with appropriate diversion. Due to the previously contentious nature of the closures in some quarters, it was historically escalated to an executive decision, whereas public rights of way closures are normally an officer decision. So this report, therefore, requests agreement to the temporary closures laid out therein for the durations tabulated. It should be noted that only one consultee objected in the prior consultation, the details of the objection and the council's responses being laid out in the report, and I thank officers for the detail that has gone into the report. The report also proposes that this closure decision should in future years be delegated to the Director of Place and Growth in consultation with the Executive Member for Environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions or any comments from anybody? Right, so we'll move straight to the vote. Agenda item 74.8. Page 173, you'll find most of the recommendation, just a small part of it on page 174. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And I think that concludes the business for tonight's meeting. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for all members of the public attending. And thank you very much to all the officers for attending. Good night.